Super exciting series that W has asked Sandstone, which Paul and I are a part of, to take part in, which is kind of a whole concept around corporate reporting, how to solve it, and mainly we're going to talk how W Energy has kind of gone about solving that from their end. A lot of cool stuff we're going to cover. First thing I want to do is kind of do some group introductions here. You've got three of us here. I'm the aforementioned Michael Tanner. I work at Sandstone Group. We help oil and gas companies all up and down the value chain, mainly when it comes to finance and reporting issues. I've worked in and around oil and gas operators my entire career. So just, again, very excited that W asked us to come on and help here. Paul, I'll kick it over to you. You can give us a quick overview of yourself.
Yeah, you bet. So I basically built my career in the data space, specifically working with software developers to build software that's been everywhere from, co-founder of a bidirectional ML company all the way through, Fortune 100 companies, building those either data models, the governance around them, or really just having conversations of what data is, the importance of it, and then building levers so that people can actually use data to make decisions, not just have pretty dashboards. So Casey?
Yeah. Hey, everybody. So I have worked with most of you on this call through some capacity at W, and thank you all for joining us today. I'm very excited you're here. I'm the senior manager of solutions at W. So it's my role to work with customers and the market to present our solutions and solve their problems. One of the main ones being data. And how you consume and report on that data and how you use it to make impactful business decisions. So that's why we're here today, and I hope you guys will ask us some questions and get a lot out of this session.
Absolutely. If you guys can't tell, both of them are much smarter than me. I just get to stand over here and wave my hands a little bit. So really excited. As she mentioned, go ahead and ask any questions throughout. If they come to mind while we're covering it, we'll go ahead and answer them either as they're asked or at the end. We'll kind of do a bucket Q&A session. So really what I want to start off talking about is the pain. And probably the reason most everybody is here and watching this is most corporate reporting sucks. Let's just throw it out there, put it all on the table. Most corporate reporting, unfortunately, sucks. And why? Why is that? Well, there's a variety of reasons. One, data is generally siloed in multiple different systems. If you're a production engineer, you've got your system that's managing production. If you're in accounting, you've got all your accounting data in your accounting database or system. You may not have a database there. If you're in reserves, you're using Aries, PhD Win, Combo Curve, and you got all your reserves data there. The problem is most corporate reporting requires an integration of all of that. You don't just want to see production. You want to see production versus forecast. You don't necessarily just want to see historical trailing 12-month P&L. You want to also stitch that in with a little bit of a forecast. So part of the reason why corporate reporting becomes so difficult is you've got siloed data. And the other fact is, generally, the person who owns in a corporation, who owns this type of reporting, must be cross-collaborative in terms of must be able to work with engineering. They must be able to work with the operations team. They must be able to work with finance and accounting and investor relations and third-party stakeholders. So there's generally, especially if you're at a smaller size company, there rarely is somebody who actually owns this solution. And the third and final point, which you see up here on the screen, is most people and most users are focused on the wrong part. We're going to talk a lot about dashboards because they're sexy. But really, what's not sexy is the underlying data. And the example I always like to use is a Ferrari. It's the Ferrari body is definitely looks good. So let's just say, for example, you've got a Ferrari body and you've installed a lawnmower engine in there. Well, on the outside, it looks extremely great because, hey, it looks all good, looks great. But if you were to, I'm from Colorado, if you were to take that Ferrari up to a Bandimere Speedway and give it a good old test run, well, guess what? That's not going to go more than 10 feet before the thing stalls out. Why? Well, because the underlying engine isn't great. On vice versa, if you have if you've got a 2000 Dodge Grand Caravan, which was the first car that my parents made me drive to high school in, that doesn't look great on the outside. But if you were to put a jet engine in the middle of that thing, well, that thing's going to get you from point A to point B really quick. And by the time you get to the end, people are not going to be like, oh, wow, he's in a Dodge Grand Caravan. They're going to be like, holy smokes, that car was fast. So dashboards are the sexy body. Data is the non-sexy engine. But the problem is data lies underneath that dashboard and actually drives it. I tell people all the time, 95% of the hard work comes into organizing and cleaning the data. You do that part right, the dashboard actually builds itself. And you'll see in part 3, using something called data view that you'll hear again a lot about throughout this call, it makes building the report so easy. It almost builds itself. And so really awesome. Here's kind of an overview quickly of kind of your average oil and gas firm's data landscape. As I mentioned, this is representing that entire data silo function, okay? You've got, most people have their land function sitting in an isolated system. They've got accounting, they've got production, they've got operations. You can think of operations as like daily oil and gas drilling reports, generally, maybe there's some costs in there for ongoing daily costs. We know that there's a big issue of, hey, I used to always hear from my boss, hey, I know we spent money yesterday because we're drilling, but I'm not going to see that in the accounting software for 30 days. So where does that lie? So that's kind of what I'm talking about with operations. And you notice none of them really cross collaborate. They're all isolated. They're all in their own verticals, and generally reports that are built just on top of those individual data silos. If you're looking into land software, you're basically only going to be able to get DOs out of that. If you're looking at accounting, really all you're going to be able to see is necessarily a trailing 12-month P&L statement. If you're in production, maybe all you're going to be able to see is your forecasted production going forward, and then operations has all your kind of daily budget, and maybe you get some actual reserves in there if you're talking about your forecasting stuff. Generally, then what has to happen is you've got to combine these all to actually get a report. And that's where I say, most of these reports and most of this data ends up in some ever-growing Excel file that eventually threads out. And now you're stuck with, oh, great, what do I need to do from here? And so what I like to tell people, or where I kind of want to start, is actually with the solution. Start at the end point. We all know this is what the end wants to look like. Management and maybe yourself wants to see a full-blown economic P&L report where you can go both historical and forecast. Production engineers, your COO is definitely going to want to see a very high-level production overview. And as you can see, it's got a combination of maps, it's got a combination of charts, whatever the end goal is. And so this is usually where people start to say, I want something that looks like this. And they try to focus on starting to build the report. The problem is what they don't realize, going back to my Ferrari example, is that the data is the engine. And once you design your data correctly, these reports build themselves. So unfortunately, the actual solution, as I like to say, is some sort of database. And these are just 2 examples of database tools that you can use. One of them being Microsoft SQL Server, the other one being Azure Data Studio. But there's also a host of other solutions. The key is the data that underlies and lays under your report is actually the solution. And that's really where we're going to focus these next 3 parts on, is figuring out how to design and overview that solution, figuring out how to actually, what does that data warehouse actually look like in my own company? And then third, how do I actually go about building a report? And the cool part is once we get to part 3 and Casey and I start building these reports, you're going to see how actually easy it is when you have a fully functional data warehouse. So when we talk about data warehouse, and this goes back to the struggle that I had going back to pitching management when I was working for operators, is the word data warehouse is this, I don't want to say pie in the sky, but it can be. For some, it's hard to visualize. For somebody who doesn't know much about databases or isn't necessarily tech savvy, they can kind of get lost in the weeds. So really, what are we talking about when we say data warehouse? Well, I'm talking about a clean, organized, error-free, and repeatable method to store, update, and retrieve data. Okay, I'm going to repeat that. a clean, organized, error-free, and repeatable method to store, update, and retrieve data. And, just like the bullet points say, notice what I didn't say. I didn't throw out a tech stack at you. I didn't throw out Databricks. I didn't throw out Excel or AWS or Azure or insert any database that you're familiar with. Why? Because they technically all could solve the problem. If you could solve and create a clean, organized, error-free, and repeatable method to store, update, and retrieve data using smoke signals, go ahead and use that because smoke signals work. Now, as we'll get to it, smoke signals may not be the best way, but the focus isn't necessarily on the underlying technology, even though we will talk about that specifically in part 2. Any one of them can solve, but it's going back to you need a place where you can store your data, you can update it, you can access it, you can version control it, and you can do everything you need to do to be able to constantly stay up to speed with your reporting. One of the big things that we're going to do in this is kind of walk through, again, designing the solution. And really the designing of the solution is per your needs. There's no one size fits all. There's no a tech stack that works for company A may not necessarily work for company B. And for all you former product managers out there, for Casey and Paul, you may or may not be familiar with the circles method. And the circles method is really just a way to break down a high-level problem into multiple ways, which at the end will allow you to summarize a recommendation. Paul, can you talk a little bit about this circles method from a high level?
Yeah, so I mean, this is something I've implemented in a lot of companies, and also in some ways really just educated different levels of management, right? Even, executive, to evaluate trade-offs, to understand what the real pain point is, right? There's a difference between pain and discomfort. But like Mike said, essentially, yeah, it's a problem-solving framework that where, anything can essentially solve, your solution within your company, but it's evaluating the trade-offs, understanding like what you're actually aiming to solve. And so Mike's going to do a great job of like going into more detail of these different items. What this to say it is not is it's not a, hey, I met someone at a conference who's implementing MongoDB in their company. We should do the same thing. So let's go hire someone who has a data background to implement MongoDB, right? It's also to say it's not a, hey, a company at our size is about this. It's truly to say we actually don't know the answer. We have a good guess or a possible solution. Henry Ford was kind of known of this of sorts of like you could either like basically some customers of sorts like wanted a faster horse, but instead he built like the Model T. And it's to say that like through some of these type of problem solving frameworks, you can actually uncover different outcomes than what you initially thought about. And that's part of the intention is to find different solutions, evaluating those solutions, again, going through this framework to not just think of something, but go through an exercise and really, confirm what that best solution is because of all these different metrics. So.
Yeah, and Casey, I want to bring you in here, and because I think we've kind of comprehended the situation. We know that the problem is data. What are you hearing from your customers when they talk about their struggles with data specifically?
Yeah. So what I hear from our customers when I talk to them, or what I hear from people in the market, is that when we provide a canned report, it is only about a certain percentage acceptable for them. So they say, yeah, this looks fine, except this. So they want to change a few things, or they want to be able to have the ability, or they want the ability to bring in data from multiple sources. And then the third thing that I hear often from our customers and people in the market who deal with these complex challenges in oil and gas is that they don't want to build a data model. They want a data model provided for them that they can start building immediately. Maybe they have somebody, maybe they're working with a consultant who can do something like that. But typically, when you're talking about somebody working their day-to-day job, they're not wanting to take on a second responsibility of maintaining a data model. So having that provided to them is something that they ask for repeatedly. And that's what W is trying to provide and create value and let them start building immediately.
No, absolutely. And it comes down to that exactly what you said. Every company has their kind of unique flavor of how they want to see things. And so being able to design a solution that is malleable to not only fit your needs today, but fit your needs in 6 months. That's, I think, the other part that is crazy, because if you're going to design a solution that works today, but not in 6 months, well, then you're going to be just back at square one. So we'll go
And
ahead
what
and
I want to say something to that point. A lot of times when I talk to people, they'll say, well, this is fine for what we're doing today, but we have plans. We intend to invest in a completely different basin, or we intend to go after a different product, or we're starting to do some sort of production, something different in their field. And so, like, what they have today may work today, but they know that they've got challenges on the horizon that they're going to have to solve for tomorrow, and they want to start thinking about it now.
It's way better to be proactive than reactive. Trust me, I've been on the reactive side a lot of times in my career, and it's much better to play offense versus defense, as you like to think about it. So I think we've got a good idea of what the situation is. Corporate reporting sucks, and we got to figure out a way to change that. And the way to change it is by actually focusing on the data and not the dashboard. So I want to jump to specifically identifying the different stakeholders in this whole data management problem. Obviously, you have executive management. You've got people that lead finance teams, operational teams. You've got human resources. You've got all of these different business units that require different reports on different timeframes. You've also got working and royalty interest owners. And so obviously that first bullet, I should say, is internal stakeholders at your company. Now you've also got all of these external stakeholders as well. You've got working interest and royalty owners, which need all of those division order reports, want LOS statements, want to see where their expenses, need jibs, all that jazz. You've also got investors and partners. They've got an idea of what they want to see. You've got bank, with specifically when it comes to audit and RBL borrowing based stuff. And then you have M&A and A&D counterparties. All of these stakeholders at some point in their interaction with you are going to need a report. Some one-off, some reoccurring, some on a daily basis, some on a weekly basis. But identifying and narrowing it into your specific stakeholder needs is critical, because then what we need to do is we have to figure out what are those stakeholders' actual needs. And so that's the second part, or the third part of that circles method, which is, okay, what do each of these stakeholders need? And again, this is not a end all be all. As Casey just said, there is many different ways to skin this cat. But generally, what does executive management want to see? Well, they want to see a profit and loss statement. And what they probably want to see is a profit and loss statement that stitches on a forecast that says, okay, here's what our revenue was last month. But what's our revenue going to be in 2 months, in 3 months? I know that in 4 months, we're going to have an RBL redetermination. So what does our CapEx spend look like relative to that? And so being able to manage those things together is critical. They're also going to want to see, production variance where, hey, here's what our actual volumes are. Here's what our forecasted volumes were. Are we higher? Are we lower? And they want to be able to use that to make decisions. They're also going to want to see budget versus actual. I forever will have AFE versus actual heartburn. I wish back in my day we had something like DataView that could solve this, but generally those two items fall in different data sources. And if you're like me and you just ended up building out this Excel database, things get clunkier and clunkier. What do working interest and royalty owners want? Well, they generally want division orders, and they're probably going to want settlement statements that, and there's a variety of ways you can call settlement statements, but basically it's a way for your working interest and royalty owners to understand, hey, here's how much my revenue was, here's what my jib was, and then here's actually what makes up that jib. It's not just, hey, you owe me $20,000 and I'm paying you $25,000. It's what kind of makes up that statement. If you're an investor in oil and gas, whether you're a limited partner and more of a fund, whether you're actually, again, a working interest owner, you're going to want to see my distribution details. What was my net production? What was that? You're also going to want to see settlement statements, again, because you're going to want to know what makes up that statement. If one of your stakeholders is a bank, they're going to want financial and income statements and balance sheets, just stock. They're going to need that. They're also going to want a lease operating statement, but maybe that lease operating statement is a little bit different relative to what your management wants to see. So there's always that difference between profit and loss versus lease operating statement, and what goes in a P&L may not necessarily go in an LOS. So that again goes back to what Casey's saying. An out of a box report may not necessarily be able to solve both of those reports. your A&D and M&A counterparties. Well, they're going to want some version of an LOS statement. Mainly, they're going to want to get an idea of expenses. It's easy for somebody. I've worked reserves before to just throw in an expense model and say, look, great, we got a model. But is that actually indicative of what the asset that we're buying, is that actually indicative of what that looks like? They're also going to maybe want historical differentials. The list of what your stakeholders need can go on and on and on and on. I think the key, though, is, okay, writing and listing down what exactly are your reporting needs. You're probably doing some by hand now. You're probably doing some, thinking of some, or management is asking you for some. So I think it's critical to understand those. It's kind of a forecast, my version of a forecast to the future. Part 3, we're going to focus on profit and loss and an LOS statement, but we're going to have a little bit of a twist on there, because again, we want to make sure that we want to make sure that it solves an actual problem. So, this is the part that can get a little bit, for me, this is kind of the most, not confusing part, but it's the part that I tend to skip over because, I don't need to prioritize. But prioritizing how you're going to go about and who you're going to solve their problems first is critical. Paul pounds into my mind every single day: pain versus discomfort. If something's painful, you're going to need to solve that right now. If something's just discomforting, well, maybe I can push that off. And ranking where those stakeholders' needs fall within that pain versus discomfort juxtaposition, is it's kind of called, is critical, because you may find out and you may find out something that makes you rethink the way you're layering in your stakeholder prioritization. The next is deadlines. Obviously, if you've got a deadline of a report that needs to get done tomorrow, well, that's going to rank higher than something that maybe only needs to come out monthly, or maybe in 4 months, you're going to be entering, you're going to need to turn over all of your, you need to build a data room because you're going to go sell off a chunk of your assets. So maybe that's going to happen now in 4 months. So figuring out where along that timeline, it goes is critical. And then the next is return on value. And I put value in quotes because value to one person in a specific company may not mean that same thing to another company. If you're a 1 to 10 person startup oil and gas company, cost may be your beginning, middle, and end. You may think, I need to find the most cost-effective solution to solve my problem. If you're at a larger company, let's take Exxon and Chevron, for example, cost to them is actually far down the totem pole. What they're looking for is efficiency. They're looking for, how do I save my team's time and keep my team focused on their day job, not having to go to night school and become a data engineer, but keeping them focused on their actual day job. And then the level of effort. Obviously, the more effort you put in there, the more time your team has to take. So understanding what value is to you and your organization is critical. And then you can go about ranking that. And when we get into part 2, when we design a solution, well, that actually then becomes where you need to kind of look at value. I want to give an opportunity, Paul, to jump in here on the prioritization. You talk to me all the time about pain versus discomfort. How do you think about that?
Yes, I mean, well, from like your body, you can probably figure out times where you've been in pain and, in discomfort. In terms of business, this is then a challenge of like, what do you define as pain and as discomfort? As I've like implemented Agile or, Scrum sort of processes in companies, a big thing I've taken away is this idea of like, what is the words that you communicate that everyone can understand. So when we say pain, how does the organization define pain, right? If I say I'm angry to you, like my different definition of angry could be different from, yours and mine, if you will, right? So getting people to have, and, especially technical teams, on the same page, and having other teams who are collaborating with technical teams to speak, similar lingo, as well as have, similar understanding, in a lot of ways can be a change management type process, especially in larger companies. Hey, we're going to, operationalize this and ensure that, it's better efficiency. Therefore, we have these meetings, we do change management. You kind of have those things at times. as you have those definition of words of what pain and discomfort is, because again, it's going to vary to different sizes of company, or who's leading the charge, things like that, specifically as it relates to different types of value. Some people could think that the pain is like, hey, we need the fastest solution, right? We just need to play with something. Others are to say that we need the fastest solution to value of being able to make decisions. So it's one thing to like have the actual data and then have the data in an actual report that you can make decisions off of. So again, the definitions of things are important. Having conversations up and down, as well as across the totem pole, if you will. And truly your end goal is to understand like what is your North Star, because as you're then building a database and have an understanding of not only where you're going, but like what kind of engine, to your analogy, like you're going to put in the vehicle, you then have alignment within the organization. Yes, there's going to be differences in terms of which solution and what have you, but that's where the evaluation phase comes in. And prioritization is really just going to be a challenge in all ways, to have some candidly difficult conversations. The last thing I'll say about this, it's important, at least in the roles I've been, product owner, product manager, to have a decision maker for who is prioritizing it. There's this concept of like the animal mezzanine, where, for example, there's the hippo, highest paid person's opinion. Just because a hippo, if you will, comes to me and says, hey, we are doing this as the next thing, for the organizations I've been, how I've been structured in the role and given permission and support in the roles I've been in, that doesn't change the prioritization immediately. What that does is it gives a conversation to then say, hey, you as the hippo in this abbreviated analogy want this to change. If we were to change this would also mean these other things are going to change. And that means that, and I've had conversations like this, by having us change this, like we're projected to lose $2 million in the next 2 months by switching what this is, right? Because this is a sunk cost feature or product, right? Versus something that is pushing actual revenue, right? And so that's really where prioritization comes in.
Yep.
There's also a number of different prioritization frameworks, which is not the point of this specific call, but it's to say like how you're going about and evaluating what is actually important is, again, just the definitions that you have in the words that you're using. And that just takes, time and collaboration, which of course is just business. So.
Absolutely. So, that, I think prioritizing, while it can seem like a step you might want to skip over, it's critical, because again, it gives you an idea of where maybe you need to start. The next piece of this is the listing of the solutions. And so really the couple things you need to think about. One is, what tech stack do you want to go with? And the answer really is, there is no answer. It's whatever you want. As I mentioned earlier, if smoke signals solve your problem, well, go with smoke signals. That could be better. If a complex medallion style ETL architecture is what you need to implement, well, then go down that road. But it's identifying based on who my users are or stakeholders, and based on how I need to prioritize getting those stakeholders what they need, that will drive what your tech stack is. And we're going to spend part 2 talking a lot about the tech stack. So I don't want to dive too much into that, but I think it's critical to think and figure out, okay, what is actually my tech stack going to be? The next is database versus data warehouse versus data lake versus Excel. Yeah, I threw Excel in there because there may be a chance that Excel actually solves your need, but it's where does that fit in within the overall architecture that you're looking at. So understanding, again, from a tech stack standpoint, it's also to decide, what does your database look like? Do you need one database that can house all of your data? Do you need more of a data warehouse, which is a little bit more, which is multiple databases organized in a clean way? Or do you need a data lake? And, again, I don't want to spoil it too much, but what's the difference between a data warehouse and a data lake? Data lake is a little bit more for unstructured data. If you've got real-time data, if you're streaming in, real-time drilling data, that may be a little bit more unstructured. If you have everything in a structured format, a data warehouse may be the way to go. So it's all about deciding where exactly you are on this sort of technology curve here. The next is monolith versus microservice. And not to get, again, too down in the tech weeds, but think of a monolith as a pyramid where you have one architecture and one code base that can solve and manage everything. You can imagine that's where everything starts. Everything starts as one code base, because why would you have 4 different code bases if all you're doing is integrating 2 different solutions? Well, as we talked about earlier, and Casey mentioned, going forward and forecasting where my organization is going to be in 6 months, a year, 2 years. As you move across that value chain, a microservice might be the way to go, because what it does is it basically diffuses and separates all of these individual parts out and allows no single point of failure. If you have a monolithic type architecture and you pull, like a pyramid, you pull one stone out, the whole pyramid comes down. But if everything is pieced together like a microservice, it makes it much easier to adapt and update. Paul, you're familiar with kind of monolith versus microservice. Where do you fall on that chain?
I fall on the best solution for the company, right? It's also to say that there's challenges with microservice as well, right? If you have, one of those endpoints that are, indicative to having something else come in, right? It can kind of fall apart. But these are really terms that are for what I'll say is like hyper technical people, right? Individuals who dedicate their career to technology. The intention of sharing like this aspect, right, is really for, again, the different people on the call, as the executives, middle management, or, consultants and others, to then be familiar with this concept, because then like you're able to ask different questions to find, different outcomes, and then again, build solutions like off it. Oftentimes I find that people, again, just talk to someone at a networking event, or, see this article of the newest technology, or they have a sales development rep who is blowing up their LinkedIn and email and somehow found their, cell phone number, kind of the day of sorts we live in, that then they think that, hey, this is just the easiest thing because it's the most convenient.
Mm-hmm.
And this of sorts then takes effort to figure out what the true solution is. It's the same thing that you should do when you're, say, painting your house, right? You should get 3 estimates. Why? Because you're going to learn different things along the process. And then again, pick the best outcome holistically with kind of the monolith versus, microservice. There tends to be the newest thing to do is to do microservice. It used to be just monolith. Obviously, with technology, you have the ability to have microservice abilities. Some companies actually do kind of a hybrid model. Really, this type of decision is meant for like a solution architect or someone who has solution architect type of skills. So this is not to say, as, for example, an executive, I then need to pick, right? It's again, exploring that and also challenging that. Just because someone wants something does not mean they get it, right? Hey, I really want to use this technology and do this, right? Again, this is the part of the circles method to, out of a vacuum, take the emotion, take kind of the cost and the implications out, and really find the best solution, and then see if that best solution is possible. Can we afford this? Do we have the right resources? Et cetera, to then execute on it. And the execution is part of in the summary. But again, the intention of the list solutions is really just, there's a whiteboard, let's list them out, right? It's not there's wrong or right. It's the exploratory phase of it.
Yep. The other big solution question is on-premises versus cloud. We'll talk a lot about that in session 2, but really it's a decision that there's no right or wrong answer. It just comes down to, where does your company fall along this tech curve? And then the final one is human capital. I don't think people think about human capital when they think about, well, we need to improve efficiency or we need to improve this, because sometimes when you have a solution and you think you've got the solution correct, you may realize that this requires a dedicated staff member to maintain this solution. If you're at a small company, you don't have you've got a day job. You don't have a time to all of a sudden in your night, at night, become a data engineer and be able to maintain this solution on your off hours. No. Maybe your solution needs someone who's semi-dedicated, or is the solution you're thinking about actually autonomous? And this is where data view and stuff that W is working on, I think, is awesome, because it actually allows you to implement it and be autonomous. there's no maintenance required. It's what we would call analytics ready. So it's figuring out where along that human capital curve you're going to end up. The next is evaluating trade-offs. Okay, so we've listed out all these solutions. How do we determine what the trade-offs are between each of these, between the different tech stacks? You've got the famous AWS versus Azure, or really the more famous Power BI versus Spotfire. As a foreshadowing, I don't have a preference on either of them. All answers are right. Most companies end up working with all of them because, as you'll see, each of them are sort of focused on and have their own strengths, have their own weaknesses, and ultimately solve the problem. The next is, again, going back to the human capital part, is specialization. New technology always requires specific people or people with specific skills. And depending on how specific those skills are, that is really something to consider. The next would be cost. What are the hosting costs? What is the human cost, the human capital parts of doing this all? And then finally, going back to the idea of time to value. How quickly is this solution actually going to get you to your end goal? You may have the nicest medallion architecture set up, but it's going to take 6 months to implement. Well, that ain't going to meet any of your timelines. So, is there a way specifically to implement a solution that meets and actually gets us in this idea of time to value super quickly? I want to bring in Casey here for a second, and I want her to kind of talk a little bit about how DataView sort of solves all of these issues. And then specifically, I just kind of want to hear from her a little bit how you guys and W specifically have thought about these trade-offs when designing DataView.
Okay. Yeah. So thank you. So one of I'll just address the very first one, Power BI versus Spotfire. So DataView is completely reporting tool agnostic. So whatever reporting tool you want to use, we can connect DataView to. So if you're more comfortable with Power BI, Spotfire, Tableau, whatever tools are out there, you can connect Excel to it. You can use that, I think, and you can even use both. So you're not, stuck to one or the other. So if your accounting group likes Power BI, but your operations group likes Spotfire, great. The other thing that we thought about is having the ability to take all of this data that has been historically disparate and put it into one place. Hosting costs are another problem. This is a challenge that we have in all, in just all of our management. And the DataView hosting is done through a read replica. So it's not technically a read replica, but it's done through an ETL job, and you're not actually hitting the production database. So that does two things for us. That reduces the cost to maintain and to host it, but it also is going to simplify the reporting structure. So you have in a database, in an accounting database, or in any sort of database, you have a lot of tables that are connected together that are not necessarily needed in order to do reporting. So instead of taking that entire database, we're going to create, or what we've done with DataView is create a reporting database on top of your production environment. And that allows us to eliminate some of those unnecessary tables. It allows us to create the joins so you don't have to do that. But it also allows us to replace some of the data with the actual values instead of IDs, which are needed to make the database run. So it's just a much more normalized view, and you don't have to be a SQL expert to use it. So I know I said a lot of things in that cost bucket, but really doing that reporting database solved a lot of issues at one time. And then the time to value is my absolute favorite thing to talk about with DataView, because we have customers who have implemented DataView who are used to using the system, but they are not SQL experts or by any stretch of the imagination, and they're able to get in there and build a report within, an afternoon or a day or a couple of hours in some instances, because they know their data, they know what they're doing in the system, and they're able to get the information that they want out of DataView very quickly.
Yeah, no, in my opinion, kind of coming from an outside perspective, the time to value on data view, I think, is the biggest advantage that you come to, because you can literally be up and running within an afternoon when it comes to being able to going back to the solution we talked about, which is the actual underlying reports. So after you've done all that, you really now need to make the recommendation and timeline. Because again, what you're attempting to do, or what this data warehouse build is going to do, there's going to be a cost to it, whether it's human cost, whether it's an actual cost, whether it's an effort cost on your end. You're going to need to take this and get it approved by somebody, whether you're the executive and you have to think about it in your mind if you're going to approve it for yourself, whether you're an individual contributor and who has to go to a business unit leader or actual management, and then outlining a timeline on what that implementation looks like is critical. And that wraps up what we would kind of call the circle method, and going through each of those steps. Once you've done that, and whether you physically wrote them out on a table, or however you decided to go about doing it, this will lead you, and at the end give you all the information you need to make a decision on what's my architecture look like, and then how do I go about implementing this. I want to end specifically with how to pitch management. And maybe this is because I'm speaking just for myself here, because this is something that I've struggled with in my career. If you can't tell, I can talk very well. The problem is I can just sometimes ramble and just keep going. So how do you pare all of that down and put a concise overview together so that you can effectively pitch management your solution? Because at the end of the day, if you don't get team buy-in, you're not necessarily going to be able to move this solution forward. So what are some of the do's and don'ts? Let's start with the don'ts. To be honest, don't really explain what a data warehouse is. It can be a little bit pie in the sky. It goes back to stuff we've talked about with DataView. You don't actually have to explain what a data warehouse is if you're implementing something like DataView, because they've done it all for you. It's an out of the box solution. But nothing makes management, specifically non-technical management's, eyes roll over and glaze in the back of the head is when you start talking about what a data warehouse is. The other thing you don't want to do is explain the difference between using SQL and Databricks. And, this can be any tech versus any other tech, but going back to explaining what a data warehouse is, you're going to lose them, because most people don't have any idea what SQL is. Most people have no idea what, Python would be, or what Databricks is. And they're going to get lost, and you're going to spend too much time explaining that stuff, and you're going to be moving farther and farther away from actually getting your pitch approved. And then the last thing you don't want to do is provide no timeline. And I've been guilty of this throughout my career. I say, hey, we've got the solution. Here's what we need to do. But I leave it leaves there. I leave a lot to be desired when it comes from, it's ambiguous about when we're going to get it done. Something worse than management wants to see is there's no timeline on what the implementation looks like. And also putting no cost in there. You're going to want to show them, here's what the cost is from an hour standpoint. Here's what the cost might be from a physical money standpoint, and then from a level of effort standpoint. So what are some specific do's? Well, you're going to want to overview the problem. It's helpful to show specifically management what the problem is, because again, they're probably wondering, well, I just don't have my report, or my report doesn't actually tell me what I need it to do, or a variety of reasons. So actually specifically overviewing the problem, which, as we learned in the first part, is the problem is most likely the underlying data, which is the engine of the report. So showing and effectively overviewing the problem, which is the data, is the first thing you're going to want to do in a pitch to management. The second thing that you want to do is specifically highlight how this is affecting your business. Again, explaining how much time you're spending maintaining these reports can be critical, because I don't think, I don't think you fully understand how long you're actually spending on this. I sure didn't. I remember when I went to go put a pitch together for management at one of my previous companies. And after sitting down and thinking about it, I realized I was spending 15 plus hours a week maintaining a disparate data set, but then also trying to put it together to pitch management. And I was thinking, wait a second, 15 hours a week? I got a day job here. My job wasn't a data engineer. It was, it's to help analyze these reports. It's to use the reports to actually make business decisions. So understanding how this is actually affecting your business from a time standpoint, again, also critical. And then finally, you might want to actually show a potential solution. And unfortunately, even though we just spent this entire time talking about data, what management wants to see is the Ferrari. They want to see what the report looks like. So giving them a little bit of a flavor about what the solution might be and is going to extremely help them when you get down into the stuff. And the other question we get a lot is, well, what does the pitch need to look like? Well, there's the famous put together a presentation, send some slides around. You could set a one-on-one meeting with your manager. You could go the Amazon method and write a memo. And I'll tell you, the memo idea I actually personally like, because most people don't sit there and write memos. They don't use topic sentences. They don't write in full paragraphs. And doing so, one, actually helps flesh out your idea a little bit more, but it can be much more comprehensive as somebody, as say a manager is reading it. And it can allow you to do a lot more stuff. So pitching management, is probably the most critical piece of all of this, because you could have done the circles method 100% correct. You could have worked, you've implemented your system, but there's no buy-in from management. And then you end up just with the idea of shelfware. We've all heard that idea of shelfware. So effectively pitching management is critical. I'm happy to help people if you're on this call or you're listening and you're wondering how to specifically in my organization pitch management. Trust me, I've done it all wrong my entire career, so I can tell you a whole list of things not to do, and then you can learn from my mistakes and actually go do it properly and hopefully get your implementation approved. And so that's kind of wraps up this first little part. Again, we were sitting there and we're kind of just scoping the problem in this session. What we're really going to talk about in the next session is the actual design of the solution, which is the infamous data warehouse, and what actually a data warehouse is and how it will allow you to collapse all of your data sources into a one simplified location, which allows you then to layer over whatever BI tool you have and build those actual reports which cross collaborate. And I want to just turn it again back over to Casey to kind of wrap us up. You guys have built this data view product, which sits on top of your guys's ERP system, sits on top of all of your other systems. For people who have kind of joined late, give us just one final overview of what data view is, so that as we go in part 2 and build out the solution, people can kind of have this in the back of their mind to think, okay, well, if I were to use data view, how would that maybe how would I design maybe my solution differently?
So I think the best way to understand data view and what it is to actually see it and use it, which we're going to be doing in the next couple of sessions. But just a quick overview of what it is. It's a normalized reporting structure that allows you access and control of your data. So we provide canned reports that you can take and manipulate and edit, or you can create your own custom dashboards and whatever data you need to see. You can also integrate that with other systems. So getting a complete picture of your business. That's really the advantages of data view, and being able to use it quickly and not have to maintain it. But again, I will say that in the next couple of sessions, we're actually going to take a look at it and how we do things like integrate it with other systems and how we do things like build custom reports and dashboards. So the best way to understand it is to join those next couple of sessions.
Absolutely. We're actually going to get our hands dirty in part 3 and do a little report building, which I think is going to be super fun. So I want to now throw it up the questions. I know we've gotten a few questions coming in here. So if you've got a question, go ahead and drop it. I know I've got a few here that are already coming in. So Paul, can you read us our first question?
Yeah. I also had a realization I wanted to share from some of your experience, and that's just to say, like, as you are pitching management, as well as management is going about, and management's defined by whomever you are, it's then to say, make it an easy yes, right? And so it's, hey, we've looked at these risks, here's the opportunity, cost, human capital, all these different aspects, right? And that's the firm intention of the memo, the presentation, things of that nature, kind of option 1, 2, 3, ABC sort of aspect, because then you can really have the ability to make those decisions, right? Because the information you're collecting through the circles method is intended to say, hey, here's the decision to remove risk and, optimize output. So just wanted to kind of reiterate that piece. So as regards to questions, so one was, who within an organization owns the data warehouse? And so I'd be curious to say, like, what would you define as the word own, as well as you answer this question?
Casey, in your experience, who owns the data warehouse? Who generally owns this? You work with a lot of different customers. Who do you generally see owning this stuff?
It's typically whoever volunteered or got voluntold to do it. In all honesty. yeah, corporate draft. He who built it keeps it. That's accurate. I would also say that what I see happening a lot is there's somebody like that pain versus discomfort thing that we were talking about. There's typically somebody in the organization who maybe has come from another organization where they had a solution like this. And so they're like, I know we can do this better. And so they take on that challenge, and then that suddenly becomes their role. If the customers that we're talking to are lucky enough to have a dedicated data resource, which some of them are, that's fantastic, like a dedicated IT resource. Typically that's where it probably should live. But a lot of times I kind of see this role being created, or, you build it, you keep it.
Yeah, definitely he who builds it keeps it. I like that. I mean, a lot of what I've seen in both my career in and around operators is it's generally it can be anybody. It can be an operations engineer who happens to just know the most about code. It could be a VP of finance because they have a little bit of governance over all the different business units.
Mm-hmm.
It could be somebody in investor relations. It really all depends on, again, who is the person that this all falls to. And a lot of it comes down to, again, whoever builds it ends up keeping it. So I know we've got a one more question. Well, we got one more here, Paul. What is it?
Yes. What do I do? Wait, hold on. Where do I start if I have zero development experience? So I'm not sure if kind of where they're at, like within the company, or what the underlying thing is. So what comes to mind for you, Mike?
Well, it comes back to what's your solution look like? If your solution you're wanting to build is highly customized, well, that's why they invented YouTube. Go start YouTubing all of these different things that you need. It's what I ended up having to do when I got into all of this. So understanding exactly what you need is going to guide you there. I also think reaching out to people like Casey, reaching out to people. I'm happy to talk with you as well to say, hey, where do I actually start with this? I know I've got a problem. I've now done this. I've walked through this circles method and figured out here's what I think my solution needs to be. But how do I even take one step forward? A lot of the times it's actually starting, which is the hardest part. And once you start, you can move. But it's where do you start? Somewhere. And generally it can be with YouTube, but generally it's talking to a trusted resource. And sometimes it's a resource that's not in your company, because if that resource was in your company, you may or may not have solved that. So,
yeah, that's a good point. Jeffrey just made a good point in the chat. Yeah. So, I mean, initially, understanding the data, right? What's in there, also understanding like what your outcome is, what's your intention, with the data, obviously, doing the solutions, and kind of building it from there. But yeah, I like your answer, because it's then to say, hey, if I'm someone who's going to be pushing the buttons, how do I go about it? And then also, if I'm a person who's never going to push the buttons, right, an executive per se, it's then, get the consultant, talk to the other individuals, potentially hire someone, those like type of things. Ultimate goal, better reporting. Yeah, absolutely. Yep. Can't agree more, Paula.
That's a great one, Paula.
It's a good one, Paul. One more question I just saw drop in here. Let me read this here. Can I still use Excel if I implement a data warehouse? Excel. And guess what? The answer is yes, because with Excel, you can actually pipe in using pivot tables. You can pipe in stuff to Excel. That's one of the few things I love about DataView is that I don't have to learn a new BI tool. I can still use Excel, and it's awesome. So we're going to get into all of that in the next session. But unfortunately, fortunately, the answer is yes. Excel still can be used. Any other questions that are out there? I will give everybody a little bit more chance if they want to ask. Great questions, everybody. Oh yes, Power Query, Larry. We could use Power Query if you want. Pun intended, it's a powerful tool. The next one, part 2, is going to be next Tuesday, the 16th.
Right.
The 16th. And
yes,
then,
that's right.
And then the Tuesday after that is going to be the third part, where I'm going to probably send out some a little bit kind of a not a tech training course, but kind of do a lot of the getting you guys up to the point where when we get on the call, we can actually start getting our hands dirty a little bit, building a report. Casey and I what we're going to do is we're just going to sit there and actually show you how to integrate a few systems. We're going to use DataView. We're probably going to use another disparate system, show how you can layer those on top of each other and actually build a custom report. You'll go ahead and receive links. If you're signed up for this event, you're going to get invites automatically to the next one. So you're not necessarily going to have that. Oh, you'll be able to definitely view this on demand as well. So definitely tune in there if you can't make it. Even if you can't make any of the parts, still feel free to still sign up because you're going to be able to see all of this in perpetuity. Paul, Casey, I appreciate you letting me talk here. Any other thing before we let everybody go?
I think
I want to say thank you to everybody who joined. Thanks for your time today, for listening to us. I hope if you can't join the next session that you'll watch the on demand, but if you can join it, I think there's going to be some good value there. So I just want to say thank you to everybody, everybody who took the time out of their day to join us.